This video is about the 16-mark hypothesis question on the Unit 3 paper and some guidelines to getting some good marks. So what do you do on the 16-mark question? It's the big one. You need to make an argument for a hypothesis that's given to you using the sources in your own knowledge. You also need to make an argument against it, again using sources in your own knowledge, and finally conclude whether you agree or disagree with the hypothesis. So, read the question, always a good start. Source F suggests that Dunkirk was a great success. How far do you agree? Use your own knowledge, sources C, E, F, and any other sources. Those are optional. So the first thing, the statement is basically Dunkirk was a great success. That's what your answer needs to be about. Was it a success or wasn't it? You pointed at the things you have to use. They're expecting to see you use the sources they've pulled out and your own knowledge. The any others, well, that's up to you. Okay? So, step one. You've been told to use sources C, E, and F. What do they say? What side of the argument do they support? So that's the very first stage of evaluating this hypothesis. So, which quote to use also? You can pause, you can read. This source suggests it's a success, and that's the quote I'm going to use to prove it. Source C. Again, you can pause and read this Churchill speech. This suggests both. We shall never surrender is an indication of defiance. That's a success of Dunkirk. However, he does say this was a military disaster. So I can use this source on both sides of the argument. This source is a success because it's showing me that a massive number of people were rescued from the beaches at Dunkirk. So I've looked at the sources and I've worked out what side of the argument they support. Next step is to use my own knowledge, and I want to use it on both sides of the arguments. Try to think of two specific details or points you can make on either side. So, Dunkirk was a success. It was used as a propaganda success by the Ministry of Information. It boosted British morale. That's one point. Second point that shows it was a success is it wildly exceeded the expectations that the Royal Navy had by about 7 times the number of troops getting out that they thought possible. I also need to use my own knowledge on the failure side. So, the withdrawal of the British Army at Dunkirk meant that the French surrendered shortly afterwards, and British had to abandon all of their heavy equipment on the beaches. So those are 2 extra reasons that aren't in the sources from my own knowledge for both sides of the argument. So now you need to put it together. This is my side of the argument for success. Have a read of that when you pause it, looking out for the way own knowledge and sources work together to support the hypothesis it was a success. Then I do the same for failure. Again, look at how own knowledge and sources are being used at the same time. So far then we have a balanced argument using sources and own knowledge that's well focused on the hypothesis, and I now need to conclude. To get the top marks, I need to evaluate the weight of evidence. And what that means is where are the most reliable sources pointing you, or where are the most significant points pointing you. My model conclusion will hopefully make that clearer. So pause and look at that. See how I've got evaluation of the significance of points and of the reliability. So even though I've got 2 sources saying it's a success, I'm arguing that the most reliable one is actually saying it's a defeat. Furthermore, what are the successes? Well, there's an army to fight on, but you can't weigh that up against the fact that it's an army with no heavy machinery and no allies. So I think it's impossible to paint Dunkirk as a victory. So to recap, you are making an argument for the hypothesis you are offered in the question, using the sources that the question points out to you, plus others if you wish, and your own knowledge. You are then going to make the other side of the argument so that you have balance. You are then going to conclude, and if you want to get 15 or 16, it's going to be using the weight of evidence to do that. Do make sure you make a decision. Must make a judgment. You could start off making the judgment and then go on to prove it, but don't sit on the fence.